What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. I'm Isaiah. Today, I invite you once again to maybe make a cup of tea. It's rainy here, that's what I did. Grab a snack, pull up a comfy seat, and let me talk at you for a minute. Today, we're talking about Relic Blade, Catacombs of Kural. Now, I unfortunately was not wise enough to get in on the Kickstarter for this when it launched. So I bought the PDF and printed it out on nice cardstock, and do not have all of the models that are out there for it. And that's a regrettable decision on my part. As always with the supplements and books and cards and everything else that they do over at Metal King Studios, the book and the art, the miniature photography in the book, as well as just the general art in the book, let me find a good one, is absolutely outstanding. Just top notch. Makes all my little artist bones in my body just quiver with joy at the awesomeness of what is in front of me. There it is. That's the one I'm looking for. That piece right there. Just absolutely phenomenal art all the way through the book. I'm always going to point that out whenever I look at something from these guys because it's always top. Now, moving through the book from front to back, we start off with some lore, the sources of the arcane and tombs of forgotten gods and the lost champions of Kural. I'm not sure how to say that. And then we get a section on the adventure scholars of Moldorf, which are these really sweet looking dwarf. I'm assuming dwarf. They look a little bit too stocky to be gnomes, so I'm assuming dwarf expeditionaries and archaeologists. And they're cool, and they have their own little set of tactics and everything else. And then we come into some immortal warriors of Akkad, which scream very kind of chaos dwarfy to me. That kind of aesthetic here. They look like this. Oh, back up. Like that. And like this. Very cool models. Designs. Then we have Lords of the Swarm. These are, I'm assuming, some newer factions, which are like bug people. Cannot go wrong with bug people. They're always going to be a winner because they're cool. Bugs are scary and terrifying and very alien. It's not hard to turn them into a villain. Now this right here, these Magisters of Kumeria, they got a guy riding a goat. And whether it be video game, war game, RPG, tabletop, TCG, game card art, I am a fool for people riding unconventional mounts. Goats, elks, pigs, hippos, bears, whatever, lizards, I'm here for it. Then we come into the enemies that were created for this campaign. Now this campaign, the Catacombs of Kural, is happening simultaneously to the Storms of Kural that come in the two-player starter. This features some adventurers who were in the mountains and fell into a crevasse or a crack or a cave-in or whatever and ended up down in these catacombs. Now, in these catacombs, there is what can only be described as an eldritch being, an extra-planar creature of immense power named Ogoroth that has been sealed away within these catacombs for countless millennia. However, recently a crack has formed and his dark will has permeated into the very soil and bedrock of the earth. Now, just like any dark, malevolent, extraplanar eldritch being that is worth its salt, the first thing that he's got to do here is assemble an army. So it reaches out into the depths of the hollow world, and in the jungles of Irith finds a race of ape trolls, which it begins to subvert and convert through the ingestion of a magical dark fungus, and begins to mutate them into a warrior servant race. There are 8 war clans that have gathered at the tomb of Ogoroth to protect and to attempt to free him. They come in a few different flavors. We have Clan Chieftains, Clan Iron Wreckers, Clan Seers, and then we have the Eye of Ogoroth. Those are the Ogsul, the ape trolls. There are also some monsters that are, for some reason, in a slightly different section of the book that represent the Gorgons, or the more demonic-looking servants of Ogoroth, and then there are also lizard hounds. I do kind of wish that all of the enemies and stuff had been grouped together, but not a big thing. It comes with cards. There are free cards that you can download and print out for this, so that you've got the thing. So it's not like you got to dig through the book when you play to find the character things, just for the sake of me and the way I read and comprehend. I like it better when that kind of stuff is grouped together. Next up, we come into the character phase, where we're going to start talking about the phases of the turn. Now, this does work differently than a regular game of Relic Blade because it is a solo and cooperative play. And in a solo and co-op game, you want to create tension and anxiety for the player, because if you are playing solo, and a lot of the stuff that I play is solo, you don't have an opponent to bounce, banter and the hype with. So you need mechanics within the game to help create that tension. And Sean has done a wonderful job with the activation roll system. So when you choose to activate a character, you roll a d6, and there's a chart for each scenario where varying things can happen. Ideally on a 5 or a 6, you're fine and you just carry out your activation as normal. 1s and 2s are usually the worst results that can happen, and then 3s and 4s are kind of a middling. But usually what's going to happen is, if you don't just happen to be good to go, one or more of the monsters that are on the field of play are going to activate and charge, or activate and attack if they're already in base to base. Or in the worst case scenarios, you're going to start spawning new monsters. So it can get very, very out of hand very, very, very quickly if those dice rolls go poorly. Now, he does provide a mechanic for mitigating some of that. You can choose to burn your focus action preemptively. Like if you roll a 1 on your activation and like 2 monsters are going to pop up and they're both going to get to activate and do stuff, and you really don't want that to happen right now, you can choose to re-roll that dice and it counts as using your focus action. And like with everything in the Relic Blade, you can only do each activation 1 time. So you couldn't like re-roll the dice and then focus on another action. Like that counts as using your focus. But it's good that it's there, because it gives you a very, very small bit of a safety net in a very, very dangerous. A very, very dangerous subterranean set of catacombs. Now, that being said, that means that monsters could potentially activate many, many times in the course of a round, because they can activate as a result of the activation rolls. But then after all of your characters have done their one activation, then there's a whole enemy phase where all the monsters get to activate again, regardless of whether or not they already did things. Sorry, my dog is barking at a squirrel. Maybe. Calm down, sir. And after that enemy phase, it proceeds to a recovery phase, which there are also some modifications to the recovery phase. We'll talk about that in a second. After the turn phase order, it goes into special solo and co-op rules, things that you need to be aware of, game components, some scenario objectives. And again, with those cards that can be printed out from the website as a free purchase download, there are also all the tokens and everything else that you would need for playing the game. The main thing I was interested in were the monster cards. That was what I really, 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 really wanted to have. After the turn order, we get some more, or the solo and co-op rules, we get some more of these beautiful pieces of miniature photography. Just, that's imagination fuel right there. Just 100% stuff to get the gears turning. We then come into the full monster roster, or where it lists all the potential monsters, which are everything we already listed, plus the Ogoroth Gorgon, which I've fought one of these, or ran from one of these. At this point, they're absolutely terrifying when they do manage to hit. From there, we come to a sample activation chart, which is what I was just mentioning. Now, this is a sample. Each scenario or dungeon room that you play will have its own activation chart in the scenario. That threw me for a loop to begin with, because I read through this really hard, and I ended up kind of committing the sample chart to memory, and then I just got super mixed up a little bit when I first started. So just be aware that that is a sample. The actual activation chart for the scenario will be on the pages with said scenario. This also lists the cautious advance, which I already discussed with the focus, and triggered actions, as well as group activations. Staggered movement and staggering collisions are somewhat new. So sometimes when you spawn or when things happen, you'll have to scatter from a point. It says to use whatever method of determining scatter direction that you prefer. I usually use a D10 and follow the point. Now, if you stagger into an object or terrain or to a dangerous edge where you could fall, you would immediately end their movement. Characters may stagger into engagement with an enemy, but you do not get a charge bonus when that happens. In the solo and co-op version, and this is another thing, and this is something that I missed, I believe, in one of the first rooms that I did, is that there are non-combat critical hits. So if you roll a critical, which is if your dice roll matches the target number exactly, in this one, in a combat attack, it gives you extra damage. In this, on a non-combat action, you get that spent AD action dice back, which is pretty nice. Then it goes to the enemy phase, where it is very clear to state that wild monster rules do not apply here. And then we have enemy activation, which is during the enemy phase. All enemies are activated one at a time in an order chosen by the player. I think that it's just ingrained in me that I normally start with monsters that are engaged and then monsters that are not engaged, and I usually will go from the lowest health monster up, but it doesn't have to be done that way. After that, we come to enemies' behaviors. So enemies will target the closest player, and this is basically what I was just saying. Now, if there are multiple potential targets, it gives you some things to look for to determine that target. So it'll target the one with the most dodge tokens, then it'll target the one with the least remaining health, and then finally it will randomize. So just roll a D3 or whatever among targets. But it also very clearly states that enemies will never target disabled models. So you don't have to worry about the AI taking you out that way. They're always going to target the people who are up and moving around. And then we get some rules for enemy movement, some parameters. So the enemies will always move via the shortest route, but must avoid dangerous routes whenever possible. If their movement engages them with a character other than their original target, they'll just stop and attack that character. If they're forced to jump, disengage, or to break a bind, they will always focus on that action, providing that they have enough AD action dice to do so. They will only dodge or disengage when instructed as the result of an activation or scenario rules. If they have dodge tokens, they will always use them at the first opportunity. And if those moves result in a charge, they will immediately perform an attack. Enemy attacks come in the standard melee or ranged variety. Now, with those attacks, we have a couple of things to be aware of. With a melee attack, they'll always use the attack with the highest damage, and they'll focus on it if they have the action dice to do so. With ranged weapons, if they have a ranged weapon, whenever they would be instructed to charge by a direction, instead they will focus and shoot. If they're not in range or line of sight, they'll try to move themselves and then shoot still if they have the action dice remaining. Now, he does mention something after that called the Dread Sentience, which is, I like that this is here. I like that it's stated very clearly, and it says that when an event resolution or something doesn't make sense, you always resolve you always resolve the worst case scenario. So if two potentially bad things could happen and you're not sure which it is, it's the worst of the two. And I like that that can help speed up gameplay and make things go a lot quicker and smoother. And I like that it just says outright, look, man, you're exploitive deleted. So then we come into the recovery phase, and I really like the adjustments made to the recovery phase to accommodate for this solo and co-op gameplay mode. I think it's very flavorful, one, and I think it gives you ways to potentially still be victorious at the scenario, even though you might be getting your skull crushed in. And I like that you can still win without necessarily having to clear the board. Like, your objective is to just get out of the room. Like, you're just booking it. So during the recovery phase, for players, characters, it's as per the usual. You roll a dice, and on a 6, you stand up with 1 health, remembering that with 1 health, you are critically wounded, so you'll have -1 AD. However, if you fail that roll, you get to crawl. So you can immediately move 2 inches towards any direction. And why that's beautiful is because at the end of a scenario, as long as 1 model escapes the room, any models that are within 2 inches of that door also count as having gotten off the board. So if you just cannot make your recovery rolls, there is a chance that you could still crawl yourself to the door. And I think that's awesome, because it's pretty brutal. It's pretty easy to get just weighed down by mobs and beaten down. And so to have that opportunity to still get them through to the next scenario and to push through is awesome. Now, monsters also make their recovery rolls here. However, if they do not roll a 6, they're just gone, removed from play. Now, if you chose to include non-heroic characters, which I think is a keyword, into your deck of draft cards, which we'll talk about in a second, that's how you choose, it's a draft, then they are not removed if they fail the recovery roll. They will heroically endure until they successfully make it. When a player character recovers during the recovery phase, they may skip rolling on the activation chart and instead activate as normal during the next round. So there's a chance there that you're not going to get just absolutely double teamed. The game will end if all player characters are disabled at the end of a recovery phase. The game is over. As even more enemies emerge from the darkness to nibble upon your bits. Now, that is, of course, stating that unless they're within 2 inches of the door and somebody else got out of the room. Next up, we come to terrain. Now, and I think I mentioned this too in the first paragraph. Now, Blacksite Studios is partnered with Metal King. They do make an amazing set of this terrain that very aesthetically fits the Relic Blade vibe. Pre-painted as always. No, they're not paying me to say this. I just love what they make, and if I like a product or a company, I'm going to talk about them whenever I can because I like them. However, they also give you all the dimensions of all of these things. So if you are the handy dandy crafty type, you can make it yourself. I personally will be using the city streets that I have from TT Combat for Carnivale because they are in the exact same dimensions, with the exception of that they are only an inch tall. None of them are 2 inches tall, but just stack them on top of each other. So that's what I'm gonna do. That works for me. It's the easiest solution that requires the least work and more stuff that I have to do, make, or buy and bring into my home and then find a place to put. But there are, there are numerous options for how you deal with this. But you need the rooms, you need bridges, and you need some random scatter terrain. Now you need at least 1 door or some type of thing to mark a door. You need 3 braziers, you need the potion, herb, ring, and brooch treasure markers, which again are part of that free printable download. 2 trap markers and debris scatter, crumbled walls, barrels, crates, whatever you want to have thrown and strewn about your catacombs. See what I did there? And then we get some more of this beautiful miniature photography, which I just absolutely, I love. That's one of my favorite things about hobbies, is seeing the spreads of like actual miniatures on really, really cool boards. It tickles my fancy. After that, we move into the actual setting up to get ready to play. So first thing is Fate Weave actions. You have the game includes the same normal 6 Fate Weaves. You can use each of them one time, unless you have a character die, in which case you get one of them back that you've already used. So I suggest a piece of paper or putting the Fate Weave quick reference card in a sleeve where you can tick it with a dry erase or something like that. Then we come to the draft, the character draft, all of that stuff. You shuffle it. You got to have at least 4 advocate and at least 4 adversary, and you shuffle them all up, and then you throw 4 cards out on the table, and that's your team. I'm not going to go super deep into all of these aspects because you'll see me do that firsthand in the first bat rep that I do for the prologue. But it's a pretty straightforward system. It's designed to go with that Storms of Kural starter set. So if you have that starter set, you already have everything that you need to play this, minus possibly the terrain and rooms and stuff like that. So again, I'm gonna skip over that section, but the setup is very smooth, very clean. I do recommend, if you're not going to be able to just sit down and plow through the whole thing in one sitting, find some storage solutions, maybe putting things into envelopes so that you can clearly recognize and delineate what you've done, what's already been done, what options you still have, what upgrades and stuff you've got for each of the guys. I've got mine in sleeves, and at the end of the game, I'm just tucking their upgrade cards into sleeves. Is going to be my ultimate game plan here. And then after that, we come into the actual scenarios, and it shows you, this is the first one, this is the Crashdown Collaborators, and it shows you what room tiles you need, how big they need to be, where you're going to spawn, where your enemies are going to spawn, your activation table, which again is not the sample activation table, it's the one that's with the scenario. Don't be like me in that regard, be better than me in that regard. Don't confuse yourself. And it gives you everything on these 2 pages. Your enemy phase will tell you what the monsters will do specifically, whether they'll charge, attack, guard, whatever. Because it's not always necessarily going to be charge at the closest enemy. That's not always going to be their action. And there are 6 scenarios plus the prologue. You always start with the prologue. And in each of the playthroughs, you only play 3 scenarios. Which means there are 3 scenarios left undone. So the idea there is that once you play through the first half with the original 4 draftees, you take the other 4 cards that you did not pick for the first playthrough, and you can play through the other 3 missions. And that is exactly the course of action that I plan on taking here for the channel, is to go through with my first team, see how far I can get, and then go through with the second team and see how far I can get. Minor correction, it's I guess technically 5 scenarios, because you have the prologue, you have 3 rooms that you explore, and then you have the final boss fight room, which can be the Clan Chieftain boss encounter, the Clan Seer, or the Clan Seer boss encounter. And then we come into a couple of optional rules. Things such as Advanced Champions, which lets you take things with a point cost between 23 and 26. And then equip them with upgrades to bring their point to, if they cost less than 23, you can then equip them with upgrades starting out. You can also choose to take Veteran Champions, which is a way of adjusting the difficulty level. So instead of starting with nothing, you would gain 8 points of upgrades at the start of the adventure. So you're starting with a little bit more stuff going on for you. Then there's rules for heroic traits and valor, where you can actually, normally in this campaign you don't gain valor, so this gives you an option for a way to gain valor across the course of the campaign. We got rules for unexpected allies, which is kind of like if you lose somebody, it's a way to potentially pick somebody else up. The way that works is that for each, if you lose everybody dies, you can trade any number of Fate Weave actions that you have left for 5 points each, and then you can spend those fate points to add a new adventurer to the party. So when they dies, you could at least potentially get like a 5-point, saber-tooth cat or something like that. And that brings us to the end of this supplement. I love Relic Blade. I'm I like Sludge. I like Metal King Studios games. I like their aesthetic, and I like their ideas. I think that if you already have the Storms of Kural starter box, there is zero reason to not spend $10 and buy this PDF and stretch the life of your models in your collection that you already have, and especially because it allows you the opportunity to play with those toys when you might not have a friend around to play with. And anything that gives you more mileage out of what you already have, especially when it's for a very small nominal fee, I think is a great idea. Now, as of when I bought this, I don't think you could buy the physical copy yet, but I think that I read recently that both the models and the rules and stuff that were a part of that Kickstarter are available or going to be available soon. I'm pretty sure that I read that, but I could be absolutely spreading falsehoods, and if that's the case, I apologize. I didn't mean to. Anyways, Relic Blade, Catacombs of Kural. Check it out. If you're interested in Relic Blade, but you're a diehard solo gamer, then it could be worth it to consider getting the starter box and this rule supplement for $10 PDF. Now, there is still the cost of printing or whatever that goes with that, or maybe you already have a printer, whatever, you can, sort that out. But that's going to do it for me running my mouth today. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out, and letting me talk at you for a little bit. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day. And as always, I'd like to say a big, huge, from the bottom of my heart, thank you to our patrons who support us and pledge to us over on Patreon. You guys are the absolute best. If you enjoyed the content you saw here today and that's something that you would like to consider doing to help out the channel, go over there, check out the link in the description, check out the Patreon. There's a lot of cool stuff over there, including access to our Discord server, talk to me, hang out with me, talk about our work, what we got going on in the hobby, some shout outs, all kinds of cool stuff. Check it out if that's something that you think you would be into. And regardless of whether or not you do that, I want you to know that I am incredibly grateful that you decided to stop by and spend part of your day with me today, rolling dice and pushing toy soldiers around. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and as always, may the dice be ever in your favor.